Autorità.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is a real pleasure for me to welcome you all here at the Senate, also on behalf of the President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Laura Boldrini, on the occasion of the Interparliamentary Conference for the Common Foreign and Security Policy and the Common Security and Defence Policy. The conference of the speakers of the EU parliaments in Warsaw established that we should hold this interparliamentary conference just over 2 years ago. This is the fifth occasion that we meet, and we know that the IPC has already taken on an important role within the framework of interparliamentary cooperation and parliamentary dimension in the course of the semesters of the presidency of the Council of the EU. Its mandate and its commitment to dialogue, exchange and cooperation with the High Representative and the EAS and other key players in defence of the Union and in implementing foreign policy such that the Interparliamentary Conference is a key player in the new institutional framework that has followed the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty. This meeting is being held at a time characterized by great complexity. We know that there are areas of conflict at our borders and political instability in many countries with which we have very close ties and common interests. And this is testing the ability of the European Union to act in unison, showing that a lot must be done. We know that there are problematic scenarios, and as a staunch pro-European, I think that we have to face these challenges, bearing in mind that we have to give proof of responsibility and timely action as parliaments, as governments, as politicians, and this is something that our citizens and the current situation demands. Members of Parliament represent the rule of law and representative democracy at highest levels, and it is up to us to interpret this desire for security, progress and well-being of those who have placed their trust in us with continuous commitment and encouragement to our governments so that democratic values may prevail. We have to relaunch with determination the process of internal innovation of the European Union's institutions, strengthening its significance so as to respond to the changes at our doorstep rather than accept them passively. We cannot deny that to date the Union has yet to express its potential that stems from its duties, from its history and heritage, and its responsibilities vis-à-vis the international community. We're familiar with the problematic scenarios that affect our neighborhood policy. The Great Mediterranean Sea is affected by conflict, instability that obviously has a huge repercussion at a global level. The geopolitical voids that have been created along our borders are without precedent. Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Mauritania and Somalia, and many other regions are affected by the devastating thrust of terrorism and destructive ideologies that attempt to tear down democracies, freedoms, dignity in the region and in the Western world as a whole. And this has made for unbearable flows of migrants that affect our country and the European Union. Degradation, poverty, death, which affect millions of human beings. We have to therefore adopt an adequate medium to long-term strategic view and approach to promote security through military means, and above all, we must undertake to ensure that institutions may be consolidated, that there be political inclusion, and that state players are adequately recognized to promote economic and trade links and peaceful cohabitation of peoples with different identities and religions. These are very challenging tasks that require a clear vision and determination on our part. The situation along the eastern border of the Union is equally worrying on account of the crisis in Ukraine, which is testing the stability of the countries involved and the economic conditions of the Union, knowing full well that our companies are at risk of losing their market shares. And we also have to consider the issue of energy supplies, given the current international scenario. This is particularly critical. But thanks to the Minsk agreement, we can hope that there will be dialogue between Ukraine and Russia so as to stabilize this ceasefire, this truce. Within this framework, it is necessary to do away once and for all with a wait-and-see attitude and promote the activities of the new High Representative. I'm not saying this because she's Italian, but because she has a very clear European vision and commitment, and obviously want to wish her all the best in her new task as High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. And I also wish all the best to the newly appointed Italian Foreign Minister, Mr. Gentiloni, who is here to represent the Italian government. And although he's only just been appointed, he has already made some very important statements. We need to follow up with the conclusions of the December 2013 Council, which has identified a more integrated and sustainable European defense policy. We have to pursue our neighborhood policies, enlargement initiatives. We have to invest in common trade policy, pursuing bilateral trade negotiations with the United States, with Asian partners and countries in the Mercosur. I believe that a frank and open debate, which I'm sure will follow, will enable us to gain greater insights into these matters and ensure that we can engage in a quantum leap that we owe our citizens, our heritage, and our values. With this, I would like to end wishing you all a successful meeting and thanking you very much for your kind attention. I would like to now hand over to the President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Laura Boldrini. Good morning, and thank you very much, President Grasso, dear colleagues, Minister, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real honor and pleasure for me to participate here, bringing you the greetings of the Italian Chamber of Deputies. This interparliamentary conference is focusing on a number of fundamental and topical issues. We have to examine the prospect for our common foreign and security policy and our common security and defense policy. This is one of the most important processes that we have to implement within the European Union. The legal framework of our common foreign and security policy and our common security and defense policy is increasingly complex and is characterized by new instruments, starting with the figure of the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, the European External Affairs Service, consolidation of shared international missions, and the definition of a European strategy in the field of security. These are important developments that should not be underestimated, although The concrete results that have so far been achieved have been considered as somewhat disappointing. The issue of foreign policy is still a subject that some member countries look to with some hesitation when it comes to strengthening and enhancing our common position. And this is due to deeply rooted positions, and this also has to do with the sense of identity that is present in certain countries. So we don't believe that in the short term it'll be possible for us to reach a common shared position and at the same time, however, it would be a shame if Europe were not to make the most of the opportunities that can stem from this new common foreign and security policy and defense framework, so as to make our voice heard more clearly in the global scenario. We must understand that for neighboring countries and for many areas affected by crisis, a more active presence and a more determined role played by Europe, in fact, have been often indicated as being important, and certainly along our borders it would be useful for these countries to see Europe at the helm of the various processes rather than the United States. And this is true of our southern and eastern borders. We have to be ambitious and embrace a realistic form of ambition, which must be based on our awareness of objective data. Europe, more than any other entity, is well poised to be considered as a model with regard to the protection of democracy, rule of law, human rights, and prevention of conflicts, as well as the promotion of sustainable development and assistance to populations in need. We represent a model for others, and I think that this shows that we have a shared heritage that cannot be set aside and cannot be ignored, even when it comes to security. President Grasso quite rightly indicated that this is a time of uncertainty. We know that there are new areas of crisis. And these events, as we know, at times can trigger unforeseeable consequences and can also engender new instability. And I'm referring to the current situation of instability in Eastern Europe and the humanitarian emergency in our Mediterranean. Since the beginning of the year, approximately 3,000 lives have been lost, and this is a flow that is formed by asylum seekers who flee wars and countries which violate human rights. And the Mediterranean is our common southern border. As a consequence, the European Union has to face this responsibility as a whole. And along these borders, a fundamental challenge is taking place, which has an impact on the future of the Union itself, i.e. the respect and protection of the fundamental rights of all people, and these are part and parcel of Europe's identity, as was quite rightly indicated in Title I of the treaty. In addition to instability and uncertainty, however, there are also some positive signs that at times are underestimated. For instance, we must welcome the fact that many countries are no longer in a state of absolute poverty. We should also welcome the fact that democracy now prevails in certain countries after long periods of authoritarianism and dictatorship. We also know that it is possible for Europe to develop further on these grounds its common foreign and security policy and common security and defense policy. These are situations that require a common approach on the part of all member countries so as to identify common strategies and common decisions. And the decisions made must also, of course, bear in mind some priority interests, and there are some questions that I would like to share with you. Would it be possible to imagine a European energy policy without tackling the issue of our relationship with supplier countries and the issue of supplies? Wouldn't it be better for Europe to go beyond bilateralism in these relationships? Wouldn't it be better for us to do this, bearing in mind that we have shared interests? Other question, is it possible to tackle the question of migration without addressing the root causes of these flows and without a shared strategy to deal with migration? Is it possible for the European Union to play a significant role in the fight against climate change in the absence of the European Union's ability to engage with countries that are responsible for most of these polluting emissions? How can we not do so? Obviously, the unforeseeable nature of events and the speed with which change occurs such that we have to take a cross-cutting approach. Security, economy, and the safeguard of fundamental values are all intertwined. And within this framework, the delicate and prestigious task that Federica Mogherini has to tackle is of strategic importance, because we have to also remember that she is vice president of the European Commission, and she has to work on that dimension as well. And this requires that there be consistent and shared decision-making processes within the European Union. All of the European Union's policies that concern third parties, trade policies, neighborhood policy, development cooperation, management of migration flows, asylum, climate change, and energy are all matters that, given their very nature, require the full participation of and coordination of the High Representative, who is to act as a link between, obviously, our common foreign and security and defense policies and the many other areas of common interest to the Union. That such a comprehensive, integrated approach should underlie all of our decision with respect to our common foreign security policy and our common security and defense policy. We have to integrate the civilian and military aspects to a greater extent than has been the case so far, and we have to use all of our available resources, knowledge and know-how to prevent conflict and manage a crisis together. In conclusion, the extent and nature of the issues that we have to address are such that no effort should be spared by Europe to adopt common positions and to act accordingly. I therefore hope that our conference may contribute through a constructive exchange to ensure that traditional resistance will give way to the awareness of the benefits that can be gained by all within the framework of the new Lisbon Treaty framework. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
The President of the Chamber and I are now going to leave. We hope that you have a very fruitful conference, and we give the floor over now to the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Pier Ferdinando Casini. Dear colleagues, Minister, I am indeed honored and pleased to be able to welcome you to the opening session of our conference. I wish to inform you that there has been a slight change in our program. We've scheduled the fourth session at 3 and the second session tomorrow. In fact, during the second session today, we will be discussing prospects of the European defense, strengthening the cooperative approach with strategic partners, while tomorrow, the fourth session will be on the Libyan crisis. Now, we will have 3 addresses, mine, that of Mr. Chiquito, and that of Mr. Brok. And I will, at this point, make some remarks. I will try not to repeat some of the very keen and appropriate remarks that we've heard and that have been made by the President of the Senate and by the President of the Chamber of Deputies of Italy. We know that in the globalization process, Europe is a wonderful opportunity and a huge challenge for us. However, this is not sufficient. It is not sufficient for us to consider monetary, economic, trade unity. Of course, without social harmony and peace, there is no future for us. But primarily, we'll never have a political Europe with a political soul unless we succeed in working together in the area of foreign and security policy, common policy. This morning, I was at a meeting. It was scheduled a couple of hours ago by the Adenauer Foundation here in Rome, and Alcide de Gasperi, one of the founding fathers of European unity, together with Adenauer and Schuman, he is considered to be one of the founding fathers, in fact, of today's Europe. So at the time, he was deeply engaged. This was the early 50s, engaged in the issue of common foreign and security policy. At the time, our founding fathers were defeated. But, you see, at the time, they were already dealing with this idea of a common army and a common defense policy. We haven't made the necessary progress in that direction over the years, and today we are at a crossroad. Europe either continues in this direction or else it will be challenged, it will be questioned, and this is precisely what is already happening. Yesterday, Helmut Kohl, on the eve of the 25th anniversary, which is on the 9th of November, the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, said something that impressed me. let's think about it. It's quite a simple sentence or phrase, but it is crystal clear. He said, the former German Chancellor said, our future is called Europe. But we cannot take that for granted. Yes, dear colleagues, that is precisely so. We can feel that Europe is our future, but we also know that this future isn't something we can take for granted. We are going to have to take a leap and have a better, high-quality management of our economic policy, in our foreign policy and in our common defense policies. This is an economic need for us all, because clearly we need to harmonize the external representation of the Union and common and collective defense policy for a united Europe. But in particular, it is a political need. Of course, we need this process to be gradual. No one thinks that we can do this otherwise. We are politicians and we are realistic. We need to do this in a gradual manner. In any case, our will is just as important. The will to embark upon this journey together. We've congratulated our new Foreign Affairs Minister and our new representative of European policy, Mrs. Mogherini, the High Representative. And I want to be very clear here. We are very sincere in expressing our best wishes. And, of course, we have to give her the opportunity to be the representative of a common foreign and security policy. Otherwise, we can just congratulate her as a person on her new position, but we will not have solved any problems. You see, we don't only need a figure, a person there, but we need an actual policy behind that person. If that person has real powers, then I think that that will be a good step forward. I think that that will be a way to harmonize our efforts. And we can't do this randomly, because we are living in an ever more globalized world, and Europe runs the risk of being ever more irrelevant in this world. Yesterday I was reading something on the European GDP in the post-war period and on the European GDP today compared to the world GDP, and I was impressed by what I read. Clearly, today we are irrelevant, more so than we were in the post-war period, because we've got new players. We've got large countries that are now main actors in the world markets, but they are also main geopolitical actors when it comes to decision-making in international policy. So we cannot afford to be irrelevant, you see. We are staunch advocates of peace, and we know, however, that sometimes the recourse to force is inescapable. There are countries like Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, the former Republic of Yugoslavia and Macedonia. We know that those are countries that are candidates and that wish to accede to become members of the European family. And yet, just a few years ago, we had to use force in former Yugoslavia. We had to put an end to the massacres that were occurring there. Those massacres were jeopardizing the credibility of the entire international community. So you see, that was an example of a wise and far-sighted and smart use of force, and it resulted in an area characterized by stability. Today, we can consider the enlargement of our family. We can embrace and include the countries that were once devastated by war. So this is why we have peace missions. And let me just conclude by mentioning two important issues. One is Ukraine. I know that Mr. Chiquito, the chairman of the Chamber Foreign Affairs Committee, I know he will be discussing this, so I don't want to repeat anything. Let me just say this. I think that this country should be a bridge between Europe and Russia. It should not be a divisive element between Russia and Europe. And I hope that we can recover the spirit of Pratica di Mare, which is when Russia entered the NATO sphere. I know that there is criticism. We know that the taking of Crimea is considered to be illegal, and we know that there are Russian responsibilities in connection with the events unfolding over the past few months in Ukraine. That was one issue. The other is the Mediterranean. Yesterday, I was speaking with Mr. Latorre. In fact, we had an informal meeting with some Mediterranean countries, and we discussed this very matter. The Arab Springs brought a lot of hope to all of us. However, for the time being, this is over. Clearly, we hope that it may resume positively. Unfortunately, the end of that process wasn't very exciting. There are countries like Tunisia that are trying to consolidate their democratic process, and I think that's indeed a positive element. However, there is also a risk of exporting what is happening in Libya to neighboring countries. There is no state in Libya. There is no state with which we can enter into agreements. And despite the excellent work carried out by the UN Special Envoy, we run the risk of losing control of what is happening in this country. And we know that terrorist threats are exported to Europe all the time. We run the risk of having a caliphate right near the borders of Europe. And you know that irregular migration is a danger for all, not only for Italy. Of course, we are fully aware of the fact that we are the country of first entry, but this is not the final destination for many of these migrants. They want to move on to other European states. We launched the Frontex mission, but if we look at ourselves in the mirror, I think that we need to realize what the truth is. We have to acknowledge that this is not enough. We've got to do much more than that. I think that this conference will be an opportunity to refocus our attention on the Mediterranean. Over the years, Europe has focused economically and politically on spreading stability and providing new opportunities to the northeastern countries of Europe. But the Mediterranean issue is an explosive one right now. And for Europe, this can easily become uncontrollable unless we revise our policies. The parliamentary assemblies have to attach great value to an interreligious dialogue. We have to bring together different religions, different cultures, and this has to be done in the Mediterranean area. We know that this is a prerequisite for renewed security for all our countries. These are the many issues that will be discussed. Chairman Mr. Chiquito will touch upon those, and Mr. Brok also. I wish to thank you again for your very wise guidance of the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, and I thank you very much also for the huge effort that has been put into the preparation of our conference. And lastly, I wish to thank all of you. Hopefully, the bad weather will not ruin our work together, and I once again wish to congratulate Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, the new Foreign Affairs Minister of Italy. I thank him all for his commitment, and we feel very reassured by the fact that we now have you as Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for your attention. I give the floor over to Mr. Chiquito. Thank you to Mr. Casini. Dear colleagues, European policy has to deal with an international crisis today. It is indeed very intense. It is a geopolitical and economic and social crisis at once, and this is impacting all our member states. History is unpredictable. After the end of the Cold War and after overcoming the danger of a nuclear clash between the U.S. and the USSR, we embarked upon a new process. But now there are two unexpected elements which we are very troubled by. One is the economic and financial crisis, one stemming from the U.S., the other from Europe. And there is also the clash between Islam, one part of Islam, another part of Islam, and the West. In the beginning of the 21st century, in Europe and all over the world, we had to open our eyes to the fundamentalist phenomenon. We had to deal with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Today, ISIS is showing that they are pursuing a Wahhabi war. It is both asymmetrical and symmetrical. And they are looking at different states in the Islamic world. And they are using traditional as well as modern instruments in order to disrupt traditional states and statehoods, and they are using acts of violence to disrupt communities which have built up prosperity in many areas of the Middle East. ISIS is trying to gain consensus in the Arab world and penetrate European societies. And in fact, we saw this with the foreign fighters. They want to be a terrorist benchmark for those who want to use violence to disrupt the political institutions and economic institutions of the West. The birth of ISIS requires us to ponder. We have to go back to the past and wonder about the responsibilities of the West vis-à-vis the Middle East, and we need to determine how we can be better engaged in the future in order to find political solutions as well as perhaps military solutions. Within the political response, we've got to consider the need to work with governments. Governments have to be inclusive. They have to work with all the political, social, and religious forces. And hopefully this is what is happening in Iraq with the new government, which is based on a coalition with the Sunni and Shia parties. And in addition, at times, when it comes to the Mediterranean and the Middle East, regional organizations, the UN, NATO, the European Union, need to take action. They need to use all the available instruments in supporting the Kurds who are fighting for all of us. I think it is also essential to establish humanitarian and military corridors between Syria and Turkey. And within this framework, I think we can recognize the support that Turkey has finally agreed to give to the Kurd militants who are defending Kobane, and hopefully it will be possible to expand this even further. This is a tragic reality, and therefore we need to improve in terms of providing humanitarian support and also military support. And we need to be able to counter ISIS. All the political catastrophes that we've seen in North Africa and in the Middle East, in Mali, in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, those tragedies have resulted in another catastrophe, a social one, i.e. migration. And in fact, the Mediterranean has been impacted, especially the area between Libya and Italy. We have statistics on migration, and we know that the numbers have skyrocketed, and this is an expression of a real social and political tragedy. The consequences of this tragedy have encouraged the Italian government to launch the Mare Nostrum operation, which is now over. We wish to seize this opportunity to reiterate that the Mediterranean is a border for all of Europe and not only for Italy. Consequently, a European decision, i.e. the Triton operation, has to be better quality-wise. It has to enable dialogue with the countries of origin, and it has to provide humanitarian support, security, and therefore support all of Europe. And in addition to the issues that we have to deal with in the Middle East, there are more. Clearly, we need to ensure security in Israel. We need to establish the conditions whereby we can enable a two-state, two-people solution. And there are other very sensitive issues that we will clearly be delving into in the course of our conference. Mr. Casini mentioned just a moment ago our relations with Russia. On Ukraine, I think that Russia has misunderstood the genuinely democratic spirit of Maidan Square, and they've insisted on this very heavy political and military operation, which ended first in taking over Crimea and then more additional actions. The recent elections held in Ukraine confirm this analysis. In fact, the democratic liberal forces won the election. They want a stronger tie with Europe, and they want to defeat the extreme right. Whereas the elections that were held separately in Donetsk and Luhansk run the risk of engendering a secession movement, a secessionist movement, which hopefully will be thwarted. This is where sanctions are needed. And the international community has to be steady, show resolve, it has to be show restraint, and there has to be an agreement whereby we can ensure territorial integrity and political autonomy for Ukraine. And it is also necessary to have a European strategy based on the diversification of energy supplies. To conclude, this is paradoxical, we need to leverage two negative factors. In the past, we didn't have an authentic foreign and security policy, and the international situation is so severe that these two factors together, I think, can help us to overturn the situation and to improve it. So this is what I wish to say to the new High Representative, Federica Mogherini. We need to move beyond coordination efforts. We need to put in place strong political programs which show that it is indeed possible to launch a common foreign and security and defense policy in Europe. This is what the international community needs. And this is also because, at all costs, Europe has to fill the void that has been left there by other great nations or by their great mistakes. I am confident that, as far as Italy is concerned, with its new prime minister, with its new foreign minister, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, and with Mrs. Federica Mogherini, who I think is a lucky charm for us. I think they'll all be able to work in harmony with the support of the Parliament, and I will take this opportunity to reiterate that hopefully Mr. Latorre and Mr. Girone will be able to resolve their issues with India. Hopefully it will be possible for them, in fact, to return home. We know that this incident can have a negative impact on the international commitment which is put in place to combat maritime piracy. And I wish you a very successful meeting. Thank you very much.
Grazie al collega Cicchitto.
I would like to thank my colleague Fabrizio Cicchitto, and I would also like to thank all of the delegations which have expressed their solidarity and have joined us in our attempt to solve the matter of our two Marines who were involved in an anti-piracy operation, and one of them is back in the country on account of his poor health, but we know that many delegations have put pressure on the Indian authorities, and I would like to thank them for this. And now over to Chairman Brok. But before doing that, I would like to suggest that we set the deadline for the submission of amendments at 6 p.m. So any proposed amendments should be submitted by 6 p.m. Over to Chairman Brok.
Presidents, dear friends, I would like to congratulate our Italian hosts for the preparation of this conference. I must say, to be a Roman senator, to sit in such a building, was always my dream from my youth. As I studied 9 years at school Latin. But I would like to congratulate you also for the preparation of this conference. And I think we have a very full agenda to get through, and I would like to congratulate for that we cover a wide range of urgent political issues, especially the situation, the eastern neighborhood, including Ukraine, the security challenges in the Mediterranean, as well as other important topics such as the Western Balkans, EU-Africa relations, and cooperation with strategic partners. It is crucial that we discuss these issues as they have shaped Europe's security environment in the last year, and the way we confront these challenges will define our place in the future global order. Gestatten Sie mir in dem Zusammenhang ein paar Worte auch auf Deutsch zu sagen.
Let me say a few words in German in this context. This year we will be commemorating the 100th anniversary of the First World War, 75 years since the beginning of World War II, and this can be summarized by calling it the second large 30 years war in the history of Europe. These two wars claimed the lives of 70 million people. After 1945, the European Union was founded on the basis of the fact that it was always a political project. So we have to say quite clearly that the message was no war ever again and no more dictatorships. That was the very foundation of European unification. Economic cooperation was merely an instrument in this context. And I have to say that this Europe and the incredible achievements by our friends from Central and Eastern Europe who are here with us today made possible what happened 25 years ago. Namely, the fact that we are together today as all of Europe, 28 members. The miracle that happened 25 years ago was the achievement by people from Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and many other countries, including former East Germany with the demonstrations in Leipzig. German unification and the fall of the wall, which we will be commemorating in 5 days, was a consequence of the achievements of all those other people in the many Central and Eastern European countries. There would have been no German unification without Solidarność, without Václav Havel, without the human chain in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I believe this is something we should be very much aware of this year, and as a German, I would like to express my gratitude for these developments. And this should also be the foundation for our policy on Ukraine. Europe was erected after the war based on our ideas of the rule of law. The two major dictatorships of the last century, communism, socialism, and National Socialism, had been overcome on the basis of international law. And that is why what I think is so important about Ukraine is that the principle of territorial integrity and the right of sovereign nations to conclude treaties with whoever they want should be possible irrespective of what a large neighbor may think. And if we keep this in mind, or if a country stakes historical claims or seeks to protect minorities, well, if this were a valid argument, then I could tell you 100 places in Europe where we could wage wars today. But that cannot be the principle of politics in the 21st century. And I believe we have, and we should have learned from this experience of the 30 years war in Europe with the 70 million casualties and the totalitarian systems. And for this reason, our policy has to be founded on values. Of course, we have to find a path for Russia to restore international law and to save face at the same time. But at the same time, we have to make clear that since we are not waging war because of Ukraine, we have to use the instruments at our disposal in order to make clear to the aggressor that his activities have a price. And if we look at Russia today, the situation is in some ways comparable to the 1980s. And that is why I welcomed what the president of the chamber said earlier on, the energy union, a Polish proposal, that this should be discussed seriously, not in opposition to anyone else, but in order to preserve our own independence. This can help find a solution for the future. It is in the interest of the European Union and of Russia to cooperate strategically in the long term. However, this has to happen on the basis of international law. And I think that is the key point in this context.
They ask me why the EU is not acting in such questions, also in the Mediterranean. People want Europe to act. They want us to be united and proactive in confronting this crisis at the borders of the European Union. There's no issue in opinion polls where our citizens all over Europe ask more Europe than in foreign security policy. Combining our resources behind common political priorities is the only way to deal with challenges like Russia in the East or regional instability in North Africa and the Middle East. For example, we can only solve the crisis in our eastern neighborhood if we use all the tools at our disposal in a coordinated way and persuade Russia to come back to play by the rules of international law. And we have these tools. The EU is Russia's biggest trading partner and the biggest customer of energy. And here I think the customer is sometimes more influential than the seller. The European Union stands still for 30% of the GNP. We pay 60% of the development aid of the world, the European Union and her member states. And I think this has to be put in a political common language. And how can we achieve a stronger and more united European foreign policy? I think here must be the political will. And sometimes I would like to remind the member state what is it in Article 24 of the treaty, Lisbon Treaty. But building a truly common foreign and security is not just a question of the EU institutions. Being more coherent and effective, but also member states must do their part. They have written and signed this Article 24 in the Lisbon Treaty that commits member states to work together behind a common EU agenda loyally. The legally binding text we should remind ourselves of. And I believe that the new High Representative Vice President of the Commission will give us the possibilities to that. Wir haben mit Frau Mogherini ein dreistündiges.
We had a 3-hour hearing with Ms. Mogherini in the European Parliament, and I came to the conviction that we can make a new beginning here, because the synergies which led to the creation of this office can now be implemented. Ms. Mogherini will finally play a role as a member of the Commission. Yesterday, for the first time, she chaired the meeting of the foreign policy cluster of the commissioners in order to bring about a comprehensive approach. She has moved into her office at the Commission in order to become part of this incipient European government. But at the same time, she is working at the head of the External Action Service. She is the president of the Council of Foreign Ministers. So the intergovernmental part will be given a common language. We at the European Parliament are determined to support her in her work. We are convinced that some of the things that are not yet working about the Lisbon Treaty and the things which we will discuss here today, structural cooperation, battle groups and all of this, is all in the treaties. We're just not using it. We haven't launched the procedures yet, but we believe that this is now going to happen in the near future, and I think we can make clear within these crises that no single member state, big or small, will be able to solve these crises, be it Ebola or any other crisis. No country acting alone will be successful.
We have to show the solidarity to Italy. I agree totally that the migration disaster, the humanitarian catastrophe in the Mediterranean, is not just a question of one country. Every country, but also Italy, has to take its responsibility. The right combination of Mare Nostrum and Triton, it's an important point, but not the only solution. The only solution would be to solve the problems, the reasons for migration. And if we have these millions of people running away from their villages because of war, when I see how many people from Syria live now in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in Jordan. If I see that in a country like Lebanon with 4 million inhabitants, 1.3 million refugees now live, then I think this is the main reason that we have to do more for the way for stability and peace, and have to be committed to that. Not just because of humanitarian reason for these people. Also protection of Christians. Because of this crisis, perhaps one time the whole Middle East will be free of Christians, which I think would be a disastrous situation. And this also, we Europeans are based on Christianity, should take that into account and see that as an important point. But it's also the question of the life perspective. And I see that people from Africa come through Sahara and the Mediterranean with a 50% chance to survive, then I must say how bad must be the situation there that these people, and mostly the best people of their countries, run away. And here I think we should be able to bring our strengths together, that these people, in the better developing in aid, in a better policy with Africa, in a better trade policy with African countries, with clearer voices against the dictators in Africa who do so much against their own population, to overcome this and give the people a perspective at home. If we do not solve that problem, we will solve not this problem of migration, not at all. And here I think we have to show to our citizens at home to do more in this field. It's not just a question of caritas, it's a question of our own security policy in the future. And here we should go forward. And also we have to debate in the holy city of Rome what we can do with the discussions between the region. Wir haben mit ISIS eine neue Ebene.
With ISIS, we have reached a new level of the abuse of religion, religion being abused to kill other people, kill people with other ideas. This is a new level of brutality. Now, these things have happened before in the course of history. Christians have also done terrible deeds in the past. But how can we reach a level of plurality here? The three large monotheistic faiths should reach a situation of working together instead of killing one another. How can we reach a situation where old colonial borders don't lead to divisions? How can we avoid fighting between Shias and Sunnis, between everyone and everyone else? How can we prevent proxy wars from happening? In Lebanon, we have Christians, Shias, and Sunnis who report to other powers, Tehran, Riyadh, for instance. So it's proxy wars going on here. So we need better cooperation here with those Muslim powers and countries that are active here, because this is one of the main tasks of European foreign and security policy. This is what we will have to work on in the future. And I am glad that this is also an issue we will be discussing here today. We will have to find better solutions with our eastern and southern neighborhood, solutions which are good for the people living there and good for us as well. And with this in mind, I wish us a successful conference.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Chairman Brok. And now, our next item on the agenda is an address by the Italian Defense Minister, Senator Roberta Pinotti. On account of sudden institutional engagements, unfortunately, she is not able to be... Yes, in fact, she is able to join us, sorry, although she had a prior engagement, so she has succeeded in joining us. I would like to thank the delegates who are here representing members of the European Union, candidate countries, and I commend you for this initiative. I am still a senator. I have been involved in parliamentary activities, and therefore I very much believe that interparliamentary proceedings are of importance in themselves, and because they can support the work of governments. I have been invited to make a few remarks on the subject of defence as a pillar of European integration. Unfortunately, I have an engagement which prevents me from joining in the afternoon, and that is why I'm going to be speaking about defence in this session. We know that defence is essential for the effectiveness of our political system, for our economic and social systems, and for the very lives of European citizens. And this has always been the case in many respects. Modern Europe, the one we know and live in, is the result of the need to guarantee greater security. As Chairman Brok pointed out, Europe was born out of the ashes of the Second World War, one of the devastating and most severe conflicts in the history of humanity. And Europe then decided to overcome the secular conflicts that had condemned us to this devastation and to decline. And we owe a huge debt to our founding fathers, who have the strength to rebuild Europe upon a new foundation from the ashes of the World War. They laid the first stones of this building that we now know as European Union, and they did this with extraordinary moral strength, with the shortest program ever written, No More War. And this is our starting point. This is where we come from. It is an end, but it is also a means. It is a way of engaging in politics and in working together as Europeans. No more war does not mean denying the existence of conflicts, of this problem. We can't afford to do this now more than ever. This does not mean being blind and deaf in the face of a reality characterized by continuous violence, injustice, and overbearing attitudes on the part of some. We know that this means, in fact, building peace, because peace is not just the absence of conflict, but it is a lasting condition of relations between individuals, between nations, to guarantee justice for all and dignity and well-being. And this is why the European design from its inception not only aimed at integrating the respective economies, starting with those factors, coal and steel, that were vital for industrial rebirth. But the European project also stems from the idea of a common defence system. Jean Monnet, in August 1943 in Algiers, became member of the National Liberation Committee and was already processing his thoughts on a united Europe. And as he put it, we have to have a common defence system, otherwise there will never be peace in Europe if states will be rebuilt on the basis of national sovereignty. The Europe we know today is not just the result of the treaties of Rome in 1957 or the European Coal and Steel Community of 1951. It dates back to 1948 with the first collective defence agreements that then led to the establishment of the Western European Union. I'm not attempting to give you a lesson in history, but rather I would like to invite you to consider the roots of what is now defined as a common foreign and security policy and a common security and defence policy. And in so doing, we can better understand what are the roots of Europe. It's important for us to be aware of our origins and our heritage and why we're all here today. Europe of defence, therefore, is not an additional, more recent development with respect to the creation of a united Europe. The Europe of defence is at the very root of our union because it was present in that early design to build Europe since 1948, when that common defence seed was sown. We have made considerable progress. We have an organisation, a structure. We have a High Representative, Federica Mogherini. We have a security strategy. We have established what the tasks of European military forces should be. We have initiated the establishment of rapid reaction forces and a mechanism to develop military assets and capabilities. The positive drive of the past decade, unfortunately, it was somewhat weakened in recent years. Certainly, the economic crisis has impacted our ability to fund the projects that we have identified and to devote adequate attention to the subject of defence. And there is another positive element which contributed to this, i.e. the extraordinary success also in terms of global security of the enlargement process of the European Union for many years after the end of the East-West blocs. Europe was only surrounded by friends, and around this circle of friends there were more friendly countries that were prepared to transform their economic and political system, even prepared to pay a very high social cost, provided that they could accede to Europe. And this strategically advantageous condition has influenced the thinking of the most recent generations of European politicians. So defence was somewhat considered as marginal because it did not strike us as being a priority. In recent months, however, things have changed significantly. Firstly, after the recent European parliamentary elections that have led us to rethink economic themes that continue, however, to be of key importance for Europe's political agenda. We cannot claim that austerity is over, but we are timidly beginning to invest in the future and to strengthen the competitiveness of our industrial system. The European Union member states must continue to manage their resources with adequate caution, but the atmosphere has changed. But the most important element that has led us to take a different approach to defence is the result of a different geostrategic framework that has emerged. Europe is no longer just surrounded by enemies. There are latent and full-blown crises, both in the Mediterranean and along our eastern borders. What a few years ago was defined as the Arab awakening or Arab Spring was certainly a positive phase that led to vibrancy and renewal in the political systems of many of our neighbouring countries, but this was followed by a new phase in which the struggle to gain a leadership position has actually been detrimental. We're very concerned because of what is happening in Libya, where the conflict between the different factions cannot be settled despite the efforts made by many international players in the UN. We're afraid that the conflict in Libya may worsen and that there may be other factors of perturbation, such as the presence of fundamentalist elements that could project their terrorist action towards European countries in Syria and Iraq. The conflicts underway have already had a devastating effect, especially among the population. The threat represented by the so-called Islamic State is evident, and in recent months this has quite rightly become the focus of the international community's attention. In the face of this violence, we cannot afford to turn away. We have the moral duty to react and the need to intervene urgently, because we cannot allow that the Islamic State continue to engage in its devastating actions. Unfortunately, this is not the only threat. There are many other elements of crisis and conflict that have been characterizing the Near and Middle East regions. Therefore, Arab countries, together with Western countries, must work together to counter the extremist offensive actions. And we appreciate the position of hundreds of Islamic and religious leaders in various parts of the world, which have, in fact, quite clearly said that the motivations claimed by the terrorists are groundless. Coming to the regions at our borders, the most recent and unexpected development is the conflict in Ukraine. Huge damage has occurred there, both in terms of lives claimed and material damage. But the most worrying medium-term element is the rift between Russia and the Western communities. We're faced with the most severe crisis in Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the possibility that from now on Europe and Russia diverge in terms of political objectives is alarming. This arc of crises that surrounds Europe is such that the strategic framework is very different from what it was only a decade ago, and this demands that we focus on the subject of security with the same attention that we pay to economic matters, especially if we want to avoid this area of crisis may spread. The world is changing at a faster pace than Europe, and there are new dynamic nations that are propelled by their young populations and modern economic systems. And with their growth and development, these new players also demand a more significant political role, and this is questioning some global balances that we thought would never change. Europe, even in a period of low growth, is one of the key global players, and therefore it must operate beyond its area of reference, because its interests and its security have to be projected onto a global scale. And I'm talking about Europe, and not just individual European countries. I talk about Europe because in the face of the current challenges and the challenges ahead around our continent, or at on a global scale, the individual weight of our countries would be marginal. We need more Europe also to safeguard peace and international security. We need Europe to be able to play a leading role in this new phase of our history after having played this role over the past 2 decades. The fact that Europe was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace, this does not mean that we can consider our mission as having been completed. On the contrary, this is the opportunity for us to make our voice heard more clearly than ever before. This is the time for us to use the extraordinary cultural, economic and political instruments that Europe can muster. Military instruments too, whenever necessary, to intervene in a timely and effective fashion in the presence of current and potential crisis that could threaten us and others, not on account of hegemonic will, but out of a sense of responsibility and commitment to global security. The current challenge is anything but easy. There are many obstacles that hinder Europe's effectiveness and efficacy. We have have significant defense budget if you consider the total amount, but we don't spend enough if we consider that this is actually subdivided into 28 different parts. So we need urgently to adopt new mechanisms to coordinate the military spending in the member countries, incentivating their cooperation. We need common institutions that can promote investment in research and development, that can harmonize operational requirements, and that can manage according to best practices or procurement processes. We have to seek more sound convergence among member countries to ensure that our military assets are complementary and eventually able to be integrated. But first of all, we have to rediscover our common roots, the reasons behind the building of Europe. We have to go back to security and defense as fundamental pillars of United Europe, just as we do when we talk about development and economic integration. But I'm an optimist. I'm sure that we can proceed more rapidly. To quote another founding father of Europe, Altiero Spinelli, the road ahead is neither easy nor safe, but it must be pursued, and it will be. For these reasons, being here at this conference means being at the right place in the right time. It is in a context such as this that we can hope that Europe can continue to make progress along the path indicated by our founding fathers. And this is why chairpersons, members of parliament, and I wish to thank you for having invited me and for having listened to my remarks. Thank you very much.
Grazie al Ministro.
Thank you to the Minister of Defense. And now we can open the first session of the conference. The topic of this session is the Mediterranean and the crises at the borders of the European Union. Regional and global challenges from the Middle East to Ukraine. We will be hearing from the Italian Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni. After the address by the Minister, we will open our debate. I would therefore ask all our colleagues who wish to take part in the debate to hand in their forms. You've received them in your folders, asking for the floor. And those of you who do wish to speak will have to stand up in order to do so. This is for technical reasons and for the fact that we need to be able to video your remarks. And the floor over to the Italian Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni. I always obey President Casini. I will therefore stand up to make my remarks. First of all, I wish to thank the chairman and our colleagues for this wonderful opportunity. On the one hand, I think this is an opportunity to confirm the importance of the role of the European Parliament and national parliaments at a very special time. A time in which we are launching a new season for the European Parliament, for the European Commission, and soon for the European Council. And I think it is also a very special time for me. This is the very first time that I am taking the floor in the plenary hall of the Italian Parliament in my capacity as Foreign Affairs Minister. So I am very moved to be able to do this. Dear colleagues, we have been faced with many difficulties, and therefore we need more Europe. In order to overcome these difficulties, to fulfill this need, I think that Europe needs to make every effort possible to change. The economic situation is very difficult indeed in Europe, and this doesn't only depend on the performance of one country or another. It impacts the European economy overall. And in Europe, we also have a delegitimation crisis. This is unprecedented. The public opinion is losing its confidence in Europe. Just have a look at all the conflicts along our borders. This shows that there are difficulties in Europe. This shows that Europe's legitimacy is being undermined, and it needs to recover its appeal. Women, children, all the victims of conflicts need their hopes to be restored. Everyone is seeking a better future. At the end of the month here in Rome, we'll be discussing this during the interministerial conference, the Euro-African conference on the Rabat process. Of course, there are many success stories in Europe, and therefore it needs to continue growing. Earlier, Mr. Brok said, no more wars, no more dictatorships. Europe has respected that appeal, and we have a universal value. Our civilization is based on the Renaissance, on the Enlightenment, on economic and social markets. This is what we have to focus on, and this is how we can hope to overcome the many tensions that there are. We often say that they are occurring along our borders, but isn't always our border. Sometimes it is something that is going on in internal areas as well as external areas. As Italians and as Europeans, we immediately think of the Mediterranean. There isn't only one crisis in the Mediterranean. It is a huge transformation, the biggest since decolonization. And this transformation needs us. We need to have a strengthened regional dialogue. And this dialogue has to be between Europe and the Mediterranean. What about our state borders? We have relations between ethnic groups, religions, our alliances. Everything is on the move. Everything is changing. We have many hopes. Not all of them have been fulfilled, unfortunately. We know that this movement is resulting in some very severe crises. First and foremost, the one in Libya. I know there's a special session on Libya tomorrow. We've had to receive 132,000 of the 160,000 refugees and migrants fleeing from Libya. We've received them in Italy. Only people coming from Libya, mind you. And of course, we've had to make an important decision in Libya. This has been supported by the Italian Parliament. We've kept our diplomatic mission open, and there's been an effort made by the United Nations in order to prevent a further deterioration of the situation that could result in a civil war. There is a very huge risk of that occurring, dear colleagues. Just an hour, 2 hours ago, I received some news according to which the Libyan Supreme Court has even decided to nullify, to invalidate the elections held just a couple of months ago. And that Supreme Court decision will perhaps further complicate what is an already complicated situation. And of course, this confirms the need to revitalize the UN mission that is being led by Mr. Bernardino Leon, the UN Special Representative, who will be taking the floor here tomorrow. So this isn't only a threat for our borders, our coast. It is a threat that we should all be aware of. And all of us, in fact, are impacted by an unprecedented situation, which is the menace of the caliphate in Iraq and Syria. Why do I say unprecedented? Because it's going to disrupt state borders. And there is territorial occupation involved here. There is an appeal being made to foreign fighters, and it is a terrorist threat. This is a threat which is going to require not only a common effort on the part of all of us, but a very complex effort, political, military, and even a cultural effort, I would say. Mr. Chiquito referred to this extensively, so I won't go into it any further. Now, what about the crisis in the Middle East, Israel, the Palestinians? This is an age-old wound for us as well. We have been making decisions. We know that it is with a two-state, two-people solution that we can perhaps resolve the question, but we haven't managed to contribute successfully to that decision, and yet we all know that it is the only one that we can possibly accept. And then our eastern borders. We know about the ongoing tensions there. In just a few days' time, Mr. Casini said this earlier, they will be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I'm mentioning this because it would be wrong to think that there is a return to the Cold War period, which is what was very typical in that bipolar world. But the fact that that risk is gone doesn't make the situation less sensitive. A country like Ukraine, as many have said, can be a bridge between Europe and Russia, and instead it is a theater for conflict, a conflict which is frozen, as it were, and it is within Europe. The Italian position is clear. We need to respect the territorial integrity and the independence of a sovereign state of Ukraine. And this is why we have not acknowledged the Donbass elections. And this is why we we support the use of sanctions and other measures against Russia. I think that there is room for a political solution in any case. On the one hand, it's going to require that we continue to show our resolve, but at the same time, we need to keep open all the dialogue options with Russia. Presidents, colleagues, in Europe, we can no longer ask others to guarantee our security. In the past, it used to be sufficient to belong to one camp to define our foreign policy. Today, a common foreign policy can help Europe to regain momentum and to find its clear mission in the world. And it is only by meeting these expectations that Europe can overcome the current crisis. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I will now begin to give the floor over to our colleagues who have requested to speak during this debate. I will ask my colleagues to stick to the allotted time. I've got 25 requests already for this morning session. And the first is Lord Peter Bowness from the United Kingdom. I would say that you can take maybe from 3 to 4 minutes, after which I'm going to have to ring this bell, I suppose. Yes, we do have a timer. We have a timer up on the screen. Lord Bowness, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. Thank you for the floor. I believe...
No.
Yeah, you're okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the floor. I believe that the crisis in Ukraine should have ensured that energy security and alternative sources and routes of supply should be on the top of the agenda of the European Union. It really is unacceptable that many of our member states are potentially at risk from actions by the Russian Federation, which would affect not only their economies, but their very security. Of course, we hope that relations will be normalized, but that is not an assumption which should be allowed to delay taking steps to reduce dependency on a country which is currently acting contrary to international norms. I note, Mr. President, that the European Council of 23-24 October dealt with the 2030 climate and energy policy. Now, a framework for reductions in emissions and renewables are important, but I do suggest that in the present circumstances, they are not a substitute for alternative supplies and routes for conventional energy. The Union, and I respectfully agree with the President of the Chamber of Deputies, that the Union needs to give a lead and not leave it to ad hoc commercial agreements or individual member states. We need, for example, the new pipelines which can supply member states and which do not originate or pass through the Russian Federation. Nabucco stalled because Trans-Adriatic became the preferred commercial option. Member states and at least one candidate country are divided about South Stream, which of course doesn't give a supply independent of Russia. We do need a political lead from the European Council. We need, I suggest, to think strategically, maybe for some to think the unthinkable and review our attitudes to nuclear energy, both in terms of new and facilities being phased out. And we need most of all, Mr. President, for us in our parliaments to ensure that our governments give energy security the priority it deserves, and for them to ensure that it remains permanently high on the agenda of the European Council. Thank you.
Perfetto. Anglo-Saxon.
Thank you very much. And that was a very Anglo-Saxon precision as far as timekeeping is concerned. Thank you very much. I hope the others follow the same example. France, with Joachim Pueyo, thank you very much. I would like to speak about the involvement of the European Union in the crisis in the Middle East and in Iraq in particular. The Assemblée Nationale Française's European Affairs Committee has in fact recently adopted some conclusions on this subject, and I have the mandate for me to share these with you. And in the light of these conclusions, and following the executions in Iraq in 2015, we recall that the European Union has reaffirmed its intention to counter the threat of ISIS or Daesh in Iraq and in Syria. We believe that the visibility and effectiveness of the European Union in the face of such threats would be enhanced were there an appropriate framework for cooperation. We would like to point out that such a form of cooperation is envisaged within the framework of the Common Security and Defence Policy, within the framework of the 2007 Lisbon Treaty, but this is not always implemented, and we need a permanent structured cooperation. We would like to invite member countries to enhance their cooperation in the field of defence. We are in favour of implementing as rapidly as possible this permanent structured cooperation. And I would like to add a few remarks to point out that several of our member states have voluntarily offered to participate in the fight against ISIS, which is a threat for Iraq and for the global community in general and Europe in particular. There's conflict along the borders of the European Union would, if we tackle this effectively, enable the European Union to play a leading role in the face of this crisis alongside the US and other countries in this coalition. We need to bear in mind that the current engagement and extent of our presence in Iraq does not help us find a solution to the plight of the Christians in the Orient. Kurds are saying that the international community has abandoned them, and we need humanist mobilization, dear colleagues, so as to ensure that the European Union can play a more effective role than has been the case so far. We hope that conference would be called to address the subject of the crisis and also the question of refugees. And I would like to add to this that it's essential for us to enhance our common security and defence policy in the name of peace, in the name of security, because currently the European Union member countries are faced with their public opinions that require that our ideals be reinforced, and we have to be able to tell our people that if we enhance our common foreign security and defence policy, we are also strengthening our commitment to human rights. Thank you very much, dear colleague. And now over to Ioannis Kefalogiannis, Greece.
First of all, I would like to thank Minister Gentiloni for his concrete speech. In the conclusions of the Interparliamentary Conference for the Common Foreign and Security Policy and Common Security and Defence Policy that was held in Athens on 3rd and 4th April this year under the Greek presidency, we expressed our concern for the emergence of an arc of instability stretching from Ukraine to North Africa. We shall not forget that within this arc of instability, Greece and the Republic of Cyprus are islands of peace, stability and prosperity. We shall also not forget what the President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Mrs. Laura Boldrini, said before, that Mediterranean is our common European southern border. Therefore, the sea and continental borders of Greece and Cyprus are at the same time the sea and continental borders of the European Union. For that reason, the recent escalation and the violation of the Republic of Cyprus and its sovereign rights in its exclusive economic zone by Turkey is totally unacceptable and should not remain unanswered. It is a hypocrisy if we talk about sanctions against Russia and at the same time we not discuss sanctions against any violation of our member states. Therefore, I would like to hear your reactions on the recent events, and I would also like to ask you if we examine any sanctions on individuals or on the Turkish Republic in the event of new disorders or in response to new threats and violations to Cyprus' integrity, sovereignty and security. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. And now over to Michael Gahler, Germany.
Kollegen, gelegentlich sind ja Krisen dazu da, uns klarzumachen, dass wir nur gemeinsam
Occasionally, crises can only show us that we are a relevant force to answer to these crises only if we act together. So the Russian aggression vis-à-vis Ukraine led to us imposing sanctions together, and so far we show we can see that these sanctions also show results. And I think we have to look at Ukraine. We see that weapons from Russia are still delivered to the rebels in these areas, and we have to ask ourselves how we can react to this. I have to admit that I do not particularly like this idea of Ukraine being a bridge between Russia and Europe, because Ukraine does not want to be a bridge, because a bridge is somewhere in between. I have the impression that Ukraine wants to orient itself towards Europe. It wants to be a strong pillar on the western side and wants to, at the same time, play a role directed at Russia. I'm also concerned about the development in the Mediterranean, but in this context, we should also very clearly state where we are seeing positive developments. And that's, for example, in Tunisia. There is we can only congratulate Tunisia for its constitutional process, for the democratic elections that took place on October 26th. So we as Europeans should reconfirm our responsibility vis-à-vis that country and help them on the good path that they are on, and should assign them the role of a role model for the link of Arab, Muslim, and democratic culture. I believe that this is very important in times where in other parts of the Arab world there is a lot of unrest. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to both ask the Italian presidency and the new High Commissioner, and here I'm agreeing with the French colleague who just spoke, that we should really activate those parts of the Lisbon Treaty that enable us to make more headway in the field of common security and foreign policy and common security and defense policy. Permanent structured cooperation is one example for future developments with those who really want to progress in this field. And I'd like to ask those who do not yet want to jointly progress to allow for this, so that by doing this we can really prove that common action in reinforced structures really helps us to advance. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Our colleague Gala was speaking on behalf of the European Parliament. Over to Petre Roman, Romania.
Grazie, cari colleghi italiani, prima di tutto, grazie.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank my Italian colleagues for this extraordinary reception.
I ask your little patience to acknowledge the content of a rather interesting document, the definition of the aggressor, proposed in May 1933 during the session of the League of Nations, in those times the forerunner of the United Nations. So, the definition of the aggressor. An aggressor in an international conflict will be recognized as such the state which the first will commit one of the following actions. 1. a declaration of war against another state. 2, an invasion by its own armed forces, even without a declaration of war, perpetrated on a territory of another state. 3rd, an attack by its land, naval, or air forces, even without a declaration of war, on the navy or airplanes of another state. 4, the naval blockade of the coasts or ports of another state. 5th, support given to armed bands or rebels formed on its own territory, which would have invaded the territory of another state, or the refusal, even under the demand of the invaded state, to take on its own territory all the appropriate measures in order to cut any kind of help or protection for the aforementioned bands or rebels. Well, this declaration of war was proposed by Maxim Litvinov, then the commissioner, the Foreign Affairs Commissioner of the USSR, on behalf of the USSR and on behalf of his minister, Stalin. So my question would be, would the Russian colleagues today accept the same definition? Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Over to Ojers Eriks Kalnins, Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Foreign Minister Gentiloni also for your remarks. In this globalized world, every crisis at the borders of the European Union becomes a global challenge because the European Union is a global player. When we speak of the crisis in Ukraine, we should never forget that this has led to a global crisis, and I would add to a growing crisis in Russia itself. Russia's aggression in Ukraine and its ongoing violations of international law will ultimately lead to the economic, political, and social destabilization of Russia, especially if they continue on this path. We need to convince Russia that this behavior is not just bad for Europe or for the world, but bad for the Russian people themselves. It is important that we respond firmly and consistently to every challenge that Russia throws our way. And this is why Latvia welcomes the comments made yesterday by High Representative Mogherini concerning and condemning the so-called elections in Donetsk and Luhansk. And I'm very grateful that the Foreign Minister also made reference to this farcical action that took place in occupied eastern Ukraine. And in light of Ms. Mogherini's declaration, Latvia has proposed that this conference do the same in its concluding remarks. And we would welcome the support of this conference in once again reminding Russia that no challenge to international law will go unanswered. As we know, Mr. Goebbels once said, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. We are involved also in a war of words. And in a war of words, the only weapon we parliamentarians have is the truth. We must never hesitate to deploy it forcefully, consistently, and unhesitatingly. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Over to Dirk van der Malen, Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Minister, I first want to thank you for your address, and I would like to touch upon a conflict, Gaza. For the third time in less than 6 years, the world has seen an eruption of violence we've never seen before. After the second Gaza war, Europe called upon the two parties, Palestine and Israel, to respect international law. This summer, we have seen once again an eruption of violence never seen before, even worse than the first and the second Gaza world. My question to you is, will Europe limit itself to make a plea again towards the two parties to respect international law, or will we go a step further? We think in Belgium that we have to give a signal. We must make clear to the two parties that we will hold them accountable for their acts they've committed. And so I have two proposals to make you, and I would love to hear what's the position of Italy, and I would like to invite you to discuss this with your colleagues, Ministers of Foreign Affairs in the Council. The first question is, will Europe back a UN Commission of Inquiry to define the responsibilities of the two parties in the last conflict? And secondly, will Europe do more than just pay for the destruction of the buildings and the facilities, or will we ask for those who are responsible for this destruction, will we ask them to pay the money back to us? My taxpayers in Belgium, they want to see more action from Europe.
Grazie.
Thank you. Over to Ion Mircea Pascu, European Parliament.
Thank you very much. I think that the situation in Ukraine is demonstrating at least two trends. One, in the military field, is towards calming down the operations. Another one is a shift towards the economics of the situation in that area. At the same time, all analysis is indicating that Mr. Putin has not achieved his strategic objective. And at the same time, we see a strong pressure to come back to the business as usual atmosphere with our Russian friends. I think, you know, that involves a risk. And the risk which is involved is that we would lose sight to the real challenge which the situation in Ukraine represents, triggered by Russia, represents for international legality, for the norms of behavior between states, and also for the security system in Europe. And, of course, you know, probably the pressure to restart cooperation with Russia would be strong enough, but at the same time, we should not forget that strategic reassurance should continue to the countries in the East, members to NATO and the European Union, because Russia has suffered a hemorrhage of trust in our eyes. And secondly, any solution without considering return to the status quo ante would not be a solution, but rather an invitation to see more of the same in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bernard Durkin, Ireland.
Si prepari la Lituania.
Followed by Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might comment at this moment, as other speakers have commented on, what is the strength of Europe? How does Europe react? And I would ask the question, but I would also try to give one of the answers. I would think that Europe's strength is its size, its economic power, its population, its GDP. From that should flow influence, in line with that strength and that power, but for some reason it doesn't. And to my mind, any discussion on foreign security policy, common security policy, the word common must be borne in mind. So that Europe, in order to be influential, must have a common policy that will draw the respect of others. And to my mind, the two most iconic visions that I have seen in recent times that challenges Europe's influence and challenge the respect for Europe is one, after the downing of a passenger plane over the Ukraine, when the relatives and friends of those lost in the plane were prevented from seeing their relatives' belongings, prevented by masked and hooded men who remained anonymous and against whom no action was taken. Another similar vision that challenges us and chills us is the one where hooded and masked men put the guns to the heads of innocent hostages and executed them on television. That, to my mind, ladies and gentlemen, was a threat to modern Europe, and that threat, to my mind, can only be rebutted when the people of Europe think together and act together, not necessarily in a military way, but in such a way that will ensure that those potential aggressors will have respect for Europe, for the people of Europe, and are in some way challenged. And our Belgian colleagues have made reference to this already in another context, are in some way challenged that they might have to pay or have some consequences visited upon them for their dalliance. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Over to Andronius Zoubalis, Lithuania.
Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, don't be afraid to see what you see. If we follow this famous advice by Ronald Reagan, we have to admit that we witness the ever greater Russian aggression, brutal occupation, annexation of Ukrainian territories. In this perspective, the question for us is very simple. How do we meet the challenge? How does Europe react? In my conviction, we have to start immediately creating and implementing a comprehensive strategy for long-term support to Ukraine, which would target not only aspects of direct economic and military assistance, but also support for reforms in Ukraine and its long-term foreign policy goals of a full-fledged EU membership. The strategy should consist of the following spheres of support. First, support of Ukraine's security. An example, support and training of military officers for Ukrainian armed forces to send military instructors. Second, support for political, economic, and legal reforms in Ukraine. An example, EU member states should develop a system of expert support in the areas that are most important: privatization, regulation of monopolies, reform of state-owned enterprises, public procurement, legal and energy systems, and so on and so on. Also, we should not let down the idea of creating an efficient international mechanism to register and evaluate the damage inflicted on Ukraine by the occupation of Crimea and further Russian aggression. But of course, for now, the most important thing is the need for a long-term integral strategy, a new Marshall Plan to save Ukraine. And such a plan is indeed possible. In fact, Lithuania's small prototype of the strategy is already on its way to adoption in the Parliament. Let's think, if all the state members agree to assign 3% of EU funds from a new financial perspective to Ukraine, total amount of support would be around 30 billion euros. These are the muscles we need in order to change something. As for Russia, we must not forget that it will talk peace only when it faces Europe and Western allies well prepared, both militarily, economically, and what's most important, mentally. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to our colleague Zsolt Nemet from Hungary, I wish to say that I can no longer accept requests for the floor. And to be better organized, I will now give a chance to countries that haven't yet had the floor. I mean, there are some countries that have 4 or 5 different delegates who've requested the floor, and clearly that's perhaps not the best way to proceed. So I'm going to proceed by allowing 1 delegate per country to have the floor. And of course, if at the end we have time, I will make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. But if not, we will ask you to perhaps wait until the afternoon. I mean, we're talking about foreign policy. We'll be speaking with our High Representative this afternoon about similar subjects. So I can't give everyone the floor now. I've got 30 people. So Hungary has the floor.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to express our gratitude on behalf of the Hungarian delegation to our hosts, to Mr. Cassini and Mr. Chiquito. Thank you very much. And also for the lecturers, Minister and Mr. Brok, your inspiring lectures. I believe, yes, the key question today is the future of the CFSP. What is CFSP? CFSP is the voice of Europe. And I hope that in the next 5 years, this voice can be heard much stronger all over the world with the help of our new common representative, Mr. Mogherini. What common foreign and security policy needs, on the one hand, it is institutions. This is an institution where we are now. I am first time in this framework. There is a new Hungarian delegation. There has been elections in Hungary, but as I understand, there are many new members of this institution. However, many of us know each other from different relations in the past. But secondly, we also need trust in each other. Because as I listen to you, I have the very strong feeling that we share our approaches, we share our common values, and it goes back to the European history, it goes back to the last 25 years, and it goes back to the last 10 years we are sharing the EU. We are in hard times. The Ukrainian crisis and the Middle East, especially the ISIS conflict, demonstrates it. We have to maintain our attention to both questions, to both EU-related but global problems. And as it was said, the EU is over an election period, but another important player, the US, is entering an election period. That's why the EU must pay global attention to these conflicts. Concerning the Ukraine, I would like to mention three things. One, I agree with Mr. Azubalis that the real future of the Ukraine must be in the EU. And as it was said, Ukraine is not a bridge. Ukraine must have its future in the European Union. Concerning the internal solidarity of the EU towards the Baltic countries, towards the Visegrad countries, and Romania and Bulgaria is also crucial, especially in the field of economic questions, energy diversification and supplies. And thirdly, I'd like to finish with the idea that the enlargement and the neighborhood policy requires a much closer unification, a common approach by us. I would like to welcome all the candidates here, and I hope that we will be able to create appropriate channels to our Eastern partners. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie, grazie colleghi.
Thank you. And now, Hans van Balen from the European Parliament.
Thank you, President. It is good to see Zsolt Nemeth. We know each other a long time, so good to see each other here. Mr. President, let me be brief. I agree with Chairman Brok that there was a grave violation of international law through the Russian involvement in Ukraine, and that should stop. The last Russian soldier and the last Russian sponsored personality should be gone from Ukraine. This is the only way this conflict can be resolved. Secondly, there is also an important point to be made by Ukraine itself. The Orange Revolution did not lead to more democracy, and it was a failure, unfortunately. Now there is a last chance because of the broad majority in the Rada in favor of the President and the Prime Minister. So we should, as EU, demand for a roadmap to further reform in Ukraine. We can assist Ukraine, we should assist Ukraine, but they should reform. This makes this country stronger, and then we can help it better. So I would like to have the response of the Italian presidency. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Iceland, Mr. Össur Skarphéðinsson.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me first confide in you that I'm really thrilled to speak here in the famous Italian Senate that is so well connected with the history of the Eternal City. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the Italian hosts for how well they have received us. There are 2 points that I would like to raise in this debate. First concerns Ukraine. I have to tell you, my friends, that I really feel in my heart that we have let down the Ukrainians. We were responsible for creating such a lot of expectations regarding their future. The situation today really is like this. The Russians have annexed Crimea, and it appears that President Putin is really getting through the plan that he put forth in early June in creating a kind of semi-independent entities out of eastern and southeastern Ukraine. And whilst that is the case, Ukraine will be a frozen conflict. And two of my friends here in this debate, they have said the place of Ukraine is in the EU. But whilst Ukraine is defined as a frozen conflict, it will never be able to join the EU. The other thing I would like to dwell upon is the Middle East. I think that the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis really is the origin of all the problems that we see in that region, including the emergence of ISIS with all its beheadings, crucifixions, and its inhuman activities. We have to address the situation, and the Minister of Defense from Italy says this is an age-old wound. Well, we have to dress the wound with all that we can. What have we done? We really know that the core of the problem is that Israel isn't willing to come to the negotiating table. They will be less willing now after the elections in the United States. In this context, I would like to remind you that Iceland declared their support for the sovereignty of Palestine based on the 67 borders. And I would like this opportunity to congratulate our Swedish friends that have done just the same. And this is something that the European Union really should contemplate. There needs a drastic step. And apart from that, isn't there a time that the European Union and the Europe as a whole speculates whether it is not a time to use trade sanctions to push Israel to the negotiating table? That is what I think is needed. Thank you.
Grazie, Joseph.
Thank you. Joseph Kapp from Austria has the floor.
Austria si prepari.
Vielen Dank. Der Kollege aus Österreich als nächstes, bitte.
Kann man 3 Minuten. Ich möchte gleich an meinem Vorredner an.
I would like to follow up on what the previous speaker said. I believe that a solution of the Palestinian question is the key question in order to bring about peace in the Middle East. And it was thus with great interest that we followed what Ms. Mogherini said in El País. She said that she would like to see a Palestinian state being created within the next 5 years. So she's in favor of a two-state solution. And in this context, it is important for the European Union to fight for an end to settlement buildings, to lift the Gaza blockade, and to motivate both sides, to strongly motivate both sides, so to speak, to launch a negotiating process and to bring it to a successful conclusion. The Islamic State became strong because of the failed politics in Iraq and in Syria, and this all has a political root, and this is something we should all be aware of. Second point, the dialogue with Russia. It would have been good to have a Russian representative here today, to have this dialogue here today. But in any case, it is a contradiction in itself to want to have closer economic links with Russia on the one side, but for NATO to be moving closer and closer to Russia on the other side. That's a contradiction, and we should choose one or the other. I believe that we can only have a peaceful European development with Russia, in cooperation with Russia. That does not mean that we should accept breaches of international law. This is something we should all condemn. There is a consensus on this. But still, this is a key point. And we, as Austrians, we are at the very heart of Europe. We do not want nuclear weapons to be stationed in Western Europe facing Eastern Europe and in Eastern Europe facing Western Europe. We don't want to see that happening again. And that is why a peace perspective has to be at the very focus of our efforts. And finally, let me say that there are no good violations of international law or bad violations of international law. Violations of international law are all violations of international law. And this brings to mind what Dominique de Villepin said back then in the Security Council. Finally, the Mediterranean. It is important for the European Union to become active here, economically and politically. And let me emphasize Tunisia here in this context, with a sensational, positive new constitution. And here we should also try to work more closely with Egypt. Egypt is an important, a central country in the region. I would like to thank you and congratulate our hosts on hosting this session here in the Italian Senate. I am delighted to be able to speak here in the Senate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear colleague. Christos Messis from Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, Mr. Minister, these are indeed challenging times in the foreign policy sphere. The challenges faced in the European Union neighbourhood can be proved a serious instability factor. Careful handling is therefore needed when it comes to addressing matters on the foreign policy agenda. Cyprus has always acted as a factor of stability and cooperation in the Southeast Mediterranean region and beyond. This is true both because of its good relations with the neighbours, such as Israel and the Arab world, as well as because it has itself been a stable democracy since the foundation. Today, the region cannot do with additional tension and instability. Cyprus is determined to contribute in all ways possible in the direction of preserving regional peace. This is the motive for the ongoing initiative between Cyprus, Greece and Egypt, which remains open, of course, to other countries for closer cooperation in a range of issues such as energy, economy and tourism. Because it's our wish that all countries in the region will choose to behave responsibly and in a way promoting peace, and should abstain from creating tension through their actions in this already very unstable region. Short-sighted behavior as a violation of the sovereignty of a European Union member state by a candidate country, namely the violation of the Cyprus exclusive economic zone by Turkey, as well as its continuous threats to undertake military action, can harm really badly the whole region, and more precisely, it's a serious obstacle to the role of Cyprus as a European pillar of stability in the region. And of course, last but not least, the question emerges: how can the European Union be considered a credible global actor if it cannot support effectively in such issues its own member states? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Grazie.
Thank you. Luciano Busuttil from Malta.
Si prepara la Turchia.
Turkey can perhaps speak.
Great honor and pleasure to be able to speak here in the great Aula Magna of the Italian Senate. As you can imagine, my intervention, I would like to bring back the focus on the center of the Mediterranean with the issue of illegal migration. Malta is a very small country, and if you, to give you an idea, if, for example, 1,000 illegal immigrants come into my country, due to its size and population density, it's like 1 million immigrants entering a country the size of Germany. But that's not it. That's not just the problem. Nowadays, we have intelligence, and even our Minister of Foreign Affairs has spoken in public about this threat that ISIS is infiltrating in Libya, and there is the possibility that its members can infiltrate with the immigrants and can cross the sea to come into Europe. I'll be very, very, very short on this. This is not a problem of Italy, it's not a problem of Malta, it's not a problem of the Mediterranean. It's a European problem, and I appeal here all European member states, all our colleagues here, to apply actively one of the fundamental principles on which the European Union was founded, the principle of solidarity, so that we can curb this problem at possibly at source, even though it's very difficult since there is no government, active government in Libya. But if we curb the problem of immigration at source, we'll be also protecting ourselves from any potential threats that can come from ISIS infiltrants within the immigrants that come into our shores. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. Ahmet Berat Konkar from Turkey now has the floor.
Si prepara la Norvegia.
Or we can be ready.
I would like to address the issue brought to the floor by our Greek Cypriot and Greek friends. The Turkish Cypriots have equal and inherent rights over the resources of the whole continental shelf of the island. This is accepted by the international community, and even the Greek Cypriots do not deny this. The two peoples of the island should jointly decide on how to use the offshore natural gas and oil resources. Turkey and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus has no claim in the maritime areas in the south of Cyprus, including the area where the Greek Cypriots started drilling activities. On the contrary, the seismic research activity is carried out in the area where Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus has its own licensed zones. The area where this seismic research activity is done does not overlap with the Greek Cyprus drilling activity area. We have warned all the interested parties, including the EU, in a timely manner to stop the Greek Cyprus unilateral activities. In the aftermath of the second drilling of the Greek Cyprus in June 2013, we urged once again the Greek Cypriots not to undermine negotiations as well as the rights of the Turkish Cypriots. The Turkish Cypriots made their decision clear to send a seismic research ship and a drilling platform in the area if the Greek Cypriots do not stop their unilateral activities. Reports alleging that the drilling platform was harassed by the Turkish Navy are baseless. Turkish Navy vessels are operating routine patrol duties in the region just like other navies. They do not enter the drilling area declared by the Greek Cypriots. This unilateral activity of the Greek Cypriots is against the spirit of the negotiations and is not acceptable. All the steps in reaction to the Greek Cypriots drilling activity of 25 September, the timing of the Greek Cypriots drilling creates question marks regarding their intention of continuing the negotiation process. We expect the Greek Cypriots to stop their unilateral drilling activity and concentrate on the UN negotiation process with a view to reaching an early comprehensive settlement of the Cyprus issue. This would also remedy the problem of equitable sharing of the hydrocarbon resources. While Greek Cypriots use Turkish Cypriots' reaction as a pretext to step away from the UN negotiations, we maintain our commitment and constructive approach towards an early settlement in Cyprus through the UN process. We were hoping that, building upon the convergences achieved since 2008, the talks would proceed in a results-oriented manner, and that, following the referenda, at the earliest opportunity, a lasting settlement would be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian Tybring-Gjedde from Norway. I'm sure your name is different from what I just pronounced.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And dear colleagues, let me first of all thank the host for having this interesting discussion. I would raise two issues. First of all, I had to disagree with my Icelandic and Swedish colleagues about Israel and Palestine. I don't believe that Palestine will become a democratic and peace-loving area just because the United Nations is recognizing their right for a state. I stand with Israel, I stand with a multi-ethnic Israel, I stand with a multi-religious Israel, and I stand with a freedom-loving and democratic Israel. My second issue, Chairman, is about the UN Security Council, who in August unanimously voted in favor of fighting and also doing measures to fight Iraq and Syria. In that Security Council, there are powers like China and also Russia. Well, Russia is in a special case today, but at least China. And I believe that the world is developing, and there are coming new emerging powers, new economic powers, and also they also need to contribute to fight terror. They're voting in favor of fighting terror, but they're not contributing. I believe that the rest of the world, you have several other states that are emerging, Brazil, you also have India in the future years. They should also fight terror. It's not a European issue, it's a world issue. Also, the refugees and the migration is a world issue, not just a European issue, at least not an Italian issue. So I believe that the rest of the civilized world who's developing and emerging powers should also contribute, and I think that should be a demand from the EU and the European powers and also the United Nations that they also contribute. Maybe that will be less willingness by the EES and ISIL to fight if they know they have the whole world standing behind the freedom-loving countries. Thank you, sir.
Grazie.
Thank you. From Slovenia, Janvit Golob has the floor. We wish to support the opinion of Mr. Krocht. Nie wieder Krieg, nie wieder Diktatur. Even in Europe, in the past there have been different areas, but in some areas we still see tinderboxes, and with the support of the United States, with the work carried out by Mr. Schuman, we are in situations, nonetheless, that we are witnessing now. There are endless problems which continue to arise and which need to be resolved. And we have problems to the east, to the south, and these issues need to be resolved. These solutions cannot be metaphysical projects. We need a dynamic, dialogue-based process. So we have to follow the ideas of Spinoza and Hegel. For politicians in Europe, it is important to follow the examples provided throughout history and that may be found in philosophy. After the end of the Second World War, the European Union was established. European politicians need to assist their colleagues in the Muslim world and Arab countries. They need to provide information in terms of establishing unions of democratic states, and the goal would be to enable a union in the area that would embrace Libya, Syria, Iraq, and other Islamic states. This is perhaps a project for the future in the Mediterranean area. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to our colleague from Germany, Jürgen Arndt.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I believe that considering the current challenges in foreign and security policy, there are two responses that we as Europeans, as the European Union, have to give, and that is determination and standing together. And I would like to say something about both. Determination means that the current discussion on the actual security situation in Europe has to be a discussion which is held in public. It has to be a public discussion. In the past, when speaking about the actual threats, we tended to ignore what was actually going on. We were very positive about Russia. We were also very positive about the Arab Spring. But maybe we should finally discuss with our citizens whether we are actually determined enough to make our contribution to becoming able to taking strong and tough action against these threats. I'm talking about a deterrent here. I believe that in Germany and many other countries we have to have a serious discussion about our defense budgets, and I believe that in Germany we will have to increase our budget in the years to come. My second point is standing together. Considering the Ukrainian conflict, we may have to discuss and adopt certain economic measures vis-à-vis Russia. And the greatest challenge for us as the European Union is that we have to stand together. also in dealing with the Americans. And this means that countries that are geographically distant from Europe have to be just as willing to support sanctions as those countries that are close to Europe and which have close economic links with Russia or that are dependent on Russian gas. We all have to stand together. That is the only signal that Russia is going to understand, because our key objective has to be working together with our partners. And Russia is trying to divide us, is trying to divide Europe from North America, and is trying to divide and separate European countries. So we have to act with determination and we have to stand together. Thank you very much.
Grazie,
Thank you, Marko Mihkelson, Estonia. And the last to speak will be the representative from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. Minister Gentiloni, for your presentation. You mentioned in your speech that the current challenges what we have in Europe are probably the serious ones, most serious ones since breakup of Berlin Wall 25 years ago. I would like to go further, and I think that what we've witnessed today in Europe is the most serious period of time and complex of challenges since end of World War II. I very much agree with my German colleague. The very strong position of Europe and united and common position of Europe is needed today. But look, when did we last time together commonly actually set down a security strategy? It was 11 years ago, when the European Union was only with 15 member states. I think it's very needed today, us together, commonly to understand how we can treat or face those challenges from Libya to Russia. I argue that not having proper strategic thinking among member states, we lack actually in response to Russian aggression against Ukraine. I agree with Mr. Gahler, who said that Ukraine is not a bridge between Europe and Russia. Ukraine is a European nation. Ukraine wants to be like us, and because they want to be like us, they are today attacked by Russia. This aggression is going on. Russia is sending more troops to eastern Ukraine today. Crimea is still occupied and annexed. And I think that the only way, when we are not going into much bigger confrontation against Russia, which actually is putting against us challenges against our values and principles, the rule of law and international law. And if we don't want new Cold War, if we don't want Europe again divided, we have to stand together, we have to stand strongly together and be passionate. We don't need to be fatigued in terms of imposing sanctions if needed, even more ones. But we have to be very clear, until Russian aggression is not ended in Ukraine, until the Russian last occupying soldier is not left Ukraine, we shouldn't be, ready to go into business as usual again with Russia. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Antonio Milosavsky from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Minister. It's my pleasure being here, and thank you for having this very good discussion on important issues. First of all, I would like to say a few words about the issues you have mentioned, Ukraine and Russia, and to underline the principled position, not only of Macedonia, but also from the countries from our region, that we strongly stand behind the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Each country has a right to choose its direction, destination, and alliances. So Ukraine should be given an opportunity to be part and to come step by step as a member of the European Union nation of states. Second, I would like to say that these global issues, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, ISIL, they have a really big impact, and they are a heavy burden for the Western Balkan states as well, not only for Macedonia, but also for Albania, for Serbia, for Kosovo, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina. All these countries, 15 or 20 years ago, were consumers of security assistance. And today, my country and the countries I have mentioned are contributors to the security actions and to the security issues that are of importance of the European Union. So in that sense, I just wanted to say that by this contribution, Macedonia has deserved more than just a recommendation that we are ready to open accession negotiations with the European Union. As you know very well, we are probably one of the smallest countries in the European Union, in the European continent, but fortunately or not, country with the most popular name in the continent. In that sense, I just wanted to say that it will be very good when we speak about Russia, Ukraine, Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, and all other issues. Each and everyone underlines the necessity to respect the international law. And we fully agree that the international law should be respected. In that sense, just want to say that 2008, 2011, we have appealed in front of the International Court of Justice for being vetoed to become a NATO member by neighboring Greece. And the International Court of Justice has declared a judgment that Greece was wrong and breached the international law in this sense. So in that sense, I just hope that we will be able, not only by words, but also by deeds, to prove that we are really prepared to respect the international law and to contribute to the unity of the European continent. Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you. I would like to thank the last speaker from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And now, dear colleagues, given the fact that you're all extremely punctual, and I congratulate you on this, we still have a few requests for the floor. I will give the next 4 or 5 colleagues 2 minutes each, so then we can hand over to Minister Gentiloni. The first is Josette Durieux, France, followed by our Greek colleague. Thank you very much, Chairman. I would like to go back to the issue of the Middle East as well, and I would like to say something which I'm sure will be in line with what the High Representative will be telling us, given the serious events that have taken place in Jerusalem. And with respect to the Middle East, many have said that this is the most long-lasting conflict, and it is probably also the conflict that is at the core of all other conflicts. We do agree on a number of points. The first, that the solution needs to be political. Secondly, we have to affirm the right to Israel to exist and to consolidated securities. Third point, two people, two-state solution is to be pursued. Fourthly, the status quo cannot last, even though the status quo is in the interest of some, which would like it to continue. And I think this is true of Israel, and certainly, which is true for Hamas. So even though we know that it is hard to reach a peaceful settlement, I would like to add the following remarks. I would like to welcome the initiative on the part of some countries to recognize the state of Palestine. I regret that France hasn't done so, and I would like to commend Sweden and Great Britain for having done this, and I hope that France will follow suit. I would also like to add that possibly an initiative can be reached at the UN Security Council if we don't have a US veto, and if there are no other vetoes, basing this on a Palestinian proposal. And hopefully one might be able to ensure that we go back to the 1967 principles and set an agenda in order to achieve a peaceful solution. I would like to end by saying that this political solution must be based on the principle of the rule of law. You've said this about Ukraine, you've said this about Russia, and you're right, but the same is true for this conflict. I'm sure that it is only if we uphold the rule of law that we can hope to solve this conflict. And I would like to end by saying that the proposals with respect to the final resolution with regard to this conflict should be a little bit more determined, and hopefully we can make sure that we're not just engaging in fine words. Now over to Manoussos Volodakis, Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, first of all, a few notes on the issues raised by Mr. Milosevsky of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. There are a few misunderstandings involved in the position of Mr. Milosevsky, I'm afraid, because in fact the European bodies, both the Council and the Committee, have unanimously taken the decision that all issues of accession of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia in the European bodies or similarly to other international bodies should come after the resolution of outstanding issues, including the name issue. Greece supports actively and consistently the European and Euro-Atlantic perspective of the Western Balkans. However, total respect of the Copenhagen criteria, as well as proving the ability to fully assume the obligations of a member state, is indisputably a prerequisite. Now, let me add a few words on the issue raised by other colleagues of the crisis regarding Cyprus. In the current situation, we would expect all member states and candidate member states to show their support, wholehearted and sincere support of our common European values. Nevertheless, we have a candidate member state violating sovereign rights of a member state. I'm referring to the violation of the sovereign rights of Cyprus in its exclusive economic zone by Turkey. This poses a threat both to the international law foundations of our common European project, as well as poses a threat to the issue of the common energy security policy. This must be addressed, otherwise the credibility of the European project for the future will be seriously hampered. Thank you.
William Cash del Regno Unito.
William Cash, UK.
I said I was not going to speak in this session. The next one, not this one. Sorry.
Mark Daly.
Mark Daly, Ireland. Last one, and then the Minister will be able to respond.
Have you got it? Ireland has a proud tradition of military neutrality and working on UN peacekeeping missions. Our soldiers have died in the Congo and in the Lebanon on missions for the United Nations and in the purpose of world peace. We are against the formation of a European army. I do not agree with many of the speeches this morning in relation to the creation of a European army. A foreign policy is a symbol of a nation. The deployment of Irish troops on a UN mission is a symbol of our independent foreign policy. The Irish people would be against any European army. Comments like we need a gradual approach to the creation of a European army is against Ireland's foreign policy. The idea that opinion polls, which might favour the creation of a European army in some countries, in Ireland, opinion polls, the people are against it. I want to refer to the withdrawal of the missions in the Mediterranean to help those migrants who are in need of rescue in that sea. It is an abdication of the duty of care that countries have towards those people. The withdrawal of the support for Mare Nostrum, where 100,000 people were rescued from the Mediterranean, and the replacement with a much smaller mission, is allowing people to die. It's that simple. The irony is that Europe is questioning what it should do with the EU battle groups. It has not deployed one single battle group in its entire time. Why is it not sending these battle groups to rescue those people most in need? It is a duty of care because many of these countries, these failed states, these failed democracies are former colonies. They were left in a situation where they do not have functioning systems. Those citizens are leaving those failed states, abandoned by colonies and colonizers to their fate. And now that duty of care is still there. Those former colonial powers have a duty of care to those citizens. Yet, we see them letting them die. Thank you, Chairman.
Grazie.
Thank you to all of my colleagues who have taken the floor. And now I will invite the Italian Foreign Minister to take the floor briefly. I would like to inform you that there will be a family photo, and this will be followed by a working lunch in the room next door, Sala Garibaldi and Sala Maccari, which is where we held our coffee break. The conference will resume at 3 with a second session on the prospects of the European defence, strengthening the cooperative approach with strategic partners. Thank you. Over to the Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are many issues that have been addressed, and I am only a newcomer in the debate, so I cannot do anything but express my thanks to you all for your contributions and add a brief remark. I wish to thank you because, from my point of view, this debate has once again showed us that the European Parliament and national parliaments can bring forth an essential energy and drive so that Europe can once again regain a sense of vision and purpose. And the idea that parliamentary diplomacy and parliaments can contribute to this is extremely important. Then I would like to add a few remarks. Firstly, I would like to say that as far as Ukraine is concerned, I certainly agree with those who have said that Ukraine is part of Europe, that Ukraine is part of our community, even though it is not a member of NATO, and this does not seem to likely to change in the short term, but it certainly is part of Europe and it is part of our community. When I use the expression bridge, I used it as we do in Italy. We often say that Italy is a bridge towards the Mediterranean, which of course does not mean that we do not see ourselves as being part of Europe. It does mean, however, that we believe that we have a special responsibility and role, which is due to our history and our geography. Finally, many colleagues have quite rightly stressed the need for permanent cooperation policies envisaged by the Lisbon Treaty, common foreign and security policy, common defense policy should be implemented and not just be fine statements. This is certainly one of the tasks which the Italian presidency considers as being priority, and it is certainly one of the main tasks which Federica Mogherini will have to tackle. And I would like to end by wishing the High Representative all